Usually I know, and all week long I will get little hints of things. Those of you that have preached or taught in any way, you know what I'm talking about. You'll get little messages all week long. But this one, I would get this message and I'd push it aside. And I'd look for something else, but this one always came back. And I don't see that it applies to this little body of people in this church. But maybe out there, in a podcast or a program of some kind, maybe it'll have some meaning that I'm not familiar with, I'm not aware of. But I wanted to talk this morning about the last word from God. The very last word from God. Now I want to talk about stress for a minute. Stress, if you, like most words, you look up English dictionary, 2 or 3 different dictionaries, you find different meanings, so you just have to get the best of each one and get as close as possible to what it means. Stress means the responsibility for circumstances or things that happen that you have no control of. Feeling responsible for something that happens that you have no control of. Still, the responsibility is there. And you can't shake it. You can't change it. And you can't put it off on anybody else. It's yours. And it brings this stress to you. It's such a hard thing to deal with. I was thinking about the many things in a person's life that could get them to the point to where they can't really function real well. Things happen to everybody. You know, the Bible would tell us, it rains on the just and the unjust. It talks about chance, things happening by chance. It talks about things, that come in our life that we have to fight, and some things we have to struggle with. And it's all based on the fact that we are a fallen creature and that we have an enemy. And he knows this psychology of man better than we do. Yes. For thousands and thousands of years, who knows how many thousands of years it's been and how many millions of people that he's dealt with, and he's learned the human mind and how it works. But I was thinking about things that bring tremendous stress into your life. A man's at work and he gets a phone call and says, Mr. So-and-so, your house is on fire. And he rushes home. And there's his big house that he's making payments on for all these years, and it's cost him half his life working. And it's laying there in a pile of ashes. And automatically he just goes into the mood of, what am I going to do now? I don't have a place to live. I don't have money to replace it, and the stress comes in. Something that happens that he's responsible for, but he can't change. Right. Another one, I remember, I wrote this down. I had a cousin years ago, when he first left high school. We all went to school together. He always smoked a pipe. And even in high school, he'd smoke a pipe. Later on in years, he kind of graduated to those little brown cigars, No filter or anything on them, just those little strong cigars. Well, one day the problem came up. He had a little sore throat. Went to the doctor, not thinking much about it. The doctor said, you've got cancer in your throat. And he was faced with the problem of what to do about it. There wasn't much you could do except one thing. The doctor said, we can go in there and we can remove that tissue, but it's going to affect your saliva glands, and it's going to be a hard thing to go through. Well, of course, the stress came in, something that he had no control over, but yet he had to face it. And so he went ahead with the operation, and I remember for a long time he carried a big old plastic cup around with ice water in it, and he had to drink constantly because he had no saliva. Well, he learned to deal with that. As hard as it was, he learned to deal with it and the stress of it. And after a little while, he had a little sore throat again. He went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Son, this cancer is back, and it's stronger than ever. And I just don't believe there's anything we can do about it." And sure enough, it wasn't long after that until he passed away. Now that's a level of stress that we don't have to face every day.
Right.
But in reality, in everything that we do stress, that we go through and we feel the stress, there is a little bit of hope. A little hope. If a man loses his home, he's got a little bit of hope that maybe I can rebuild. If I work hard enough, if I get a loan, maybe I can rebuild. Or my cousin that died of the cancer. There was a time when he was hoping that operation was the end of it. But there was still that spark of hope. Even till the time that he passed away, there's still a little bit of hope that maybe something will happen. And then I remember a friend of mine, she's from up in Kentucky, and she said during the Second World War, they would, he would hear people praying all the time because they had a son overseas. She said sometimes there would be this government car come up the road with U.S. Army or something written on the side of it. It would stop in front of a house. And two men in dress uniforms would get out and start walking toward the house. And they knew what was going on. That one of those men was going to say, "Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, your son has died in battle." And it got to the point to where people would watch for that car. And if it stopped in front of the house, you could hear that mother scream. For a half a mile away, you could hear her scream. And the daddy would fall to his knees and cry. Because they knew when that man got out of that car what he was going to say. And the stress of that has affected people for years and years after it's happened. Because a lot of times it was their only son. But in that there's just a little light of hope. Because after all, they loved him with all their heart, and they had many years with him. He was a good boy and went to church with them, and they found hope in it. And after a few years, they never got over it, but things got better. Then I remember, this has happened many times around Nashville because of the tornadoes and things that's happened. The weather. A man received a message. Mr. So-and-so, there's been a car wreck. Your wife was on her way down to the school to pick up your children, and someone crossed the center lane and hit them head on. And, sir, I hate to tell you this, but your wife and your 3 children are all dead. We can't imagine the stress that went with that. It's different from a house burning down. It's different than somebody dying of cancer. It's different than hearing that your son died overseas. Something makes it closer Because that woman, when you married her, that's part of you walking around out there. And those children are part of you. When that happens, some people never get over it. They spend years and years and years in therapy and taking drugs and everything else to get it off of their mind. And the stress of that is sometimes more than we can even imagine. But in that, as bad as it is, as horrible as it is, there's a little spark of hope. The man can fall back on some memories, and he can fall back on the fact that they all went to church together, that God's going to take care of them. And after all, I can make it, this week. And then that week goes by, and he says, well, I think I can make it this week. And it goes on until that little spark of hope begins to flame a little bit, and he puts his life back together. Then there's a story of a missionary overseas with his family. And the enemies of the church come in and drag him and his family out. And he has his children and his wife standing in front of him, and one by one, they cut the fruit while he watches. And he watches and hears his wife and his children, Daddy, help me. Don't let them do this, Daddy. And the stress of that brings him to his knees. But there's always that little spark. He spent his whole life on the missionary field. He knows that God somehow is going to take care of things, and his children, as much as he loved them, and his wife. The very second that they left this world, they was in the presence of God. And he would comfort himself with that. But there was always a little bit of hope. Now, there's a thing called rejection. Now, that brings some of the worst stress that people can imagine. Rejection. You wouldn't think that it does, but it does. The psychologists for many years studied the human mind. And they've noticed that, this is old news, believe me, years and years old. They've noticed that a person, when they are rejected, when they're going through rejection, that there's certain steps that they take, not even aware of it, but they take certain steps. And one of them, the first one will be when you hear of a great tragedy that's happened in your life and you feel rejected even by God. Even by the world has rejected you. Everything's rejected you. You're on the outside, and the stress and the rejection builds up on you so bad. But you find yourself not even realizing it. In your subconscious, you take these steps. Psychologists have studied people and know this. Number one is usually denial. No, that couldn't happen to me. That's not true. That's just not true. I'm not going to accept that. That's not true. Number two would be bargaining. God, if you'll just change this thing, I'll read my Bible more, I'll pray more, I'll go to church, I'll be there every Sunday. If you'll just change this, don't let this be my child. Don't let this have happened to my life. Bargaining. And then you realize the psyche of the person gets to a certain point to where they make the next step, which is anger. They're going to blame somebody. Well, if I had done this, or if I had done this, this wouldn't happen. Or if so-and-so done this, the ambulance driver, the doctor, the hospital, so on, if they had just done this, if this happened. And they try to blame, even to the point of blaming God. But anger rules for a while, and then they take the next step. The next step is depression. They sink into a depression that you can't even imagine. But each one of these steps we've got this one little bit of hope. Just a little bit. Then you get to the last step, which is acceptance. They come to that point that it's true. I don't like it. It's not going to change. Getting mad don't change anything. And he gets so he can accept it. And that way, in that acceptance, that little spark of hope can grow. But each one of these stages, each one of these steps that you take through rejection, had still able to maintain that little bit of hope. But there's something else that's going to happen one of these days that's far beyond the human thought life. The psychologists can't get a hold of this. It's far above their intellect and ours, for that matter. There is a time mentioned in Matthew 7 and again in Luke 13. There's going to be a time when Jesus looks at a group of people and says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." I touched on this last week just a little bit, but it wouldn't leave me all week long. This will happen. I don't know when, I don't know exactly how it's going to be set up, whether the man, what form he's in. But he is in a form that his mind does work because he reasons with God. He begins to say, "We have prophesied in your name, cast out devils in your name, done all these works in your name." And he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of iniquity." That, for millions of people, is the last word from God. The very last word from God. Because he will cast them into a place that he himself chooses not to remember. He won't speak to them again. Because he says, "I never knew you. I never had a relationship with you at all. All you done was follow rules. You said my name. You done these works and you said my name while you done these works. But you didn't do them in my name because we were not even related. You just said the name." And one thing we do learn, in that is the only place in a person's mind where you will find no hope. Absolute no hope. We can't comprehend that. But somebody out there in the audience, you will stand before God and you'll experience that. It's a sad thing to bring out, but if it's true, that's what's important. Is it true? If Jesus said it, believe me, it's true. Yes. That's the way it's going to be. Advice. My advice to you is to get you a Bible. You find out what it takes to have a relationship with Christ. Then you don't let the works go on without the relationship. Because it's not the works, the action that he is looking for. It's the relationship he has with you. There's people that's going to do a lot of works. But it has nothing to do with God's will in their life. A lot of religious ideas, a lot of different things we hear, opinions and things. It's a good thing to feed the poor. But feeding the poor comes after the relationship. It's a good thing to give to the hungry, but giving to the hungry comes after the relationship. Because if you do it without the relationship, he don't even know that you've done it. The people that profit from it will know, but you won't have any part in it. But I just want to leave that to the people in the audience today. What does God want with us? What does he want more than anything else? To sell everything we have and give to the poor? That would be fine if God told you to do it, do it. Does He want you to constantly be involved in good works of all kinds? That's good. Help everybody you can. That's good. But what He wants more than anything else is to know His children. He wants a relationship with you because He wants to draw you into His family. What would you like most? Would you like for your child to go buy you a present? Or to crawl up in your lap and put his arms around you and tell you he loves you? Anybody will tell you the same thing. Those things don't mean much. That relationship is what I need. And that's what we need with our children. And it's the same thing that God wants from His children. Well, I'm going to hush. I hope it hasn't been too sad. But I just had to say it. I've carried it all week long. But the final word is action after the relationship. Relationship is number one. God bless you. Thank you.
You know, I believe that the Lord is after that relationship with the church, Lord. Many times